One of the reasons Gossip Girl was considered such a controversial show in its heyday is that it was full of tons of explicit content. Here's a breakdown of the 7 most toxic and raunchy Gossip Girl hookup scenes across all 6 seasons. Chuck Bass and Vanessa Abrams. Chuck and Vanessa definitely slept together, even though the idea of the two of them together was completely shocking to Gossip Girl fans everywhere. In an episode called Remains of the J, Chuck and Vanessa kissed each other next to his bed in the morning after a night of carnal pleasure. Later in an episode called Southern Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Vanessa revealed the truth to Dan about the fact that she actually had sex with Chuck twice. Keep in mind that Chuck and Vanessa only shared an interest in each other because they were trying to break up Blair and Nate. Does it get more toxic or raunchy than that? Serena van der Woodsen and Nate Archibald. Serena and Nate's first ever hookup was toxic and raunchy because it went down at the Shepherd wedding while Nate was still very much in a relationship with Blair. To make matters worse, he swore to save his virginity for Blair, but then he carelessly gave it up to Serena on top of a hotel bar while they were both wasted. The hookup led Serena down the path of a spiral that included the overdose of a man named Pete Fairman. That trauma prompted Serena to enroll in a private school far away from Nate, Blair, and the rest of her friends. Had that hookup with Nate not happened, the rest of the evening's events likely wouldn't have happened either. Blair Waldorf and Carter Bazin. Blair and Carter hooked up with each other during Blair's rebellious phase. She was in the midst of emotional turmoil when she crossed paths with him at a bar. At the time, she was willing to do whatever she could to distract herself. In one of the wildest Gossip Girl scenes of all time, Chuck arrived at Blair's house to ask her what she was doing with an insect like Carter. She shrugged him off and started making out with Carter in front of Chuck. She was dressed in nothing more than lingerie in the scene, indicating that she and Carter had recently finished having sex. Georgina Sparks and Dan Humphrey. Dan and Georgina shared a handful of hookups, including one night where they didn't go all the way. But according to Dan, they may as well have. Later on, they really did go all the way, because it led to Dan believing he could potentially be the father of Georgina's baby, even though the baby daddy was most certainly someone else. Dan's decision to hook up with Georgina was toxic and raunchy, since Georgina was always one of the show's most vindictive and manipulative villains. Dan Humphrey, Vanessa Abrams, and Olivia Burke. Dan, Vanessa, and Olivia deciding to have a threesome together was as toxic and raunchy as it gets. According to Nate, threesomes should only ever take place between devoted couples who invite strangers into the mix. Since Dan, Vanessa, and Olivia all knew each other well, there was no way their threesome was going to easily be forgotten or swept under the rug. At the time Dan and Olivia were dating each other, Dan and Vanessa had a romantic history, and Vanessa and Olivia were roommates. Talk about messy. Chuck Bass and Jenny Humphrey. The hookup between Jenny and Chuck is arguably one of the most toxic and raunchy sexual encounters to ever take place on Gossip Girl. Chuck and Jenny turned to each other to numb the pain of their depression and loneliness. Their senseless hookup led to consequences of immense proportions. Dan found out and punched Chuck square in the face. Blair found out and proceeded to banish Jenny from the island of Manhattan. Chuck and Jenny's hookup happened on the same night when he was supposed to propose to Blair, which definitely threw things for a loop. Since she was late showing up to the Empire State Building, Jenny became his temporary consolation prize. Blair dumped Chuck, and he drunkenly stumbled into the wrong neighborhood in the streets of Prague. There he was mugged and shot down in the middle of a dark alleyway. Talk about a tragic sequence of events. Rufus Humphrey and Ivy Dickens. The most toxic and raunchy hookup scene of all definitely took place between Rufus and Ivy. Rufus abandoned all possibility of reconciliation with Lily to pursue a connection with Ivy, who was the same age as his young adult children. Their cringeworthy hookup scene was especially disturbing because Dan walked in on them as they were curled up on the floor, wrapped up in each other's arms. The cuddly moment was clearly taking place after finishing their sex session. Disgusting. Which of these Gossip Girl hookup scenes was the most toxic and raunchy in your opinion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section.